Now, we've got a very special guest coming up in just a second. But on the whole world of wokeness, which we'll be talking about, great to see that the Woolies CEO stood down. You've seen the footage of that car crash of an interview that Rita referred to earlier. But what's interesting is if consumers stand up against wokeness, so this clown said that we wouldn't celebrate Australia Day at Woolworths. He's now gone after making a fool of himself on television. But more importantly, Woolworths seem to be waking up to the fact that if you spit in the face of consumers endlessly with your political virtue signalling, it's going to come back and hit your bottom line. They've now woken up to the fact that they've said, all those checkout people and staff stacking shelves and that who virtue signal with their badges, their LGBTIQ what's it badge, or their Aboriginal flag badge, or whatever it might be, whatever political virtue signalling, that now stops at Woolworths, according to this release, which is saying that staff may no longer display all this sort of rubbish, which is great news, and which shows that you, the consumer, do have the ability to change the insanity that is surrounding us now. Speaking of that insanity, let's go to our very special guest. So last week, if you remember, I showed you the story of Konstantin Kisin, how he first came on the show back in 2018, after he refused to sign a woke kind of thing that forbade him or gave a list of those things that he couldn't talk about in his comedy show. He's then gone on. I mentioned the amazing speech he gave at Oxford University, where he attacked both the cult of climate change and the cult of wokeness. He's got an amazing podcast, Trigonometry, which I'm sure many of you are listening to, and if you don't, you should. But the great news is Konstantin is about to get on an aeroplane and come to Australia. He's visiting here. Thanks to the CIS and the IPA, you can still get tickets there. But Konstantin Kisin here is with us this morning. Konstantin, great to have you back on Outsiders. Great to know you're coming out to Australia. Many, many people very excited about that. Now, tell us the craziness that is going on in the UK at the moment. There's so much you can talk to us about, but are we winning the war against woke, or is the West's freedoms disappearing?
It's hard to know. First of all, thank you very much for having me back on the show, and I cannot wait to come to Australia. It's actually my first time, and having met many Aussies over here, I'm actually very enthused, because I sometimes feel that you guys actually are holding on to the values of the West in a way that is perhaps not true in many other parts of it. So I'm excited to find out whether I'm right or wrong about that for a start. Maybe I'll turn up and it's not quite the case. We'll find out.
You'll see.
Yeah, I look forward to it. But it's, yes, we've had a lot of things here in the UK. And of course, one of the things that we all, I think, would recognize is wokeness is not only an ideology that is anti-Western at its core, that's about teaching our children false history that means that they don't even know why it is that we are as successful, as prosperous and comfortable as we are here in the West, and therefore not perhaps willing or able to defend those values or even articulate them nowadays. But the other thing we have seen here in the UK in recent days, I don't know if you guys have followed it, is that when you have this kind of policy and you have these kind of attitudes, it then means that we're not able to challenge and tackle very, very serious threats that we are now facing. So in the British Parliament on Wednesday, we effectively had the Speaker overturn decades, if not centuries, of precedent, simply because our police no longer willing to stand up to the threats that Islamists make against MPs, including left-wing MPs in Parliament, and we had all kinds of shenanigans going on as a result. So one of the things that is happening is we're essentially weakening our immune system, I feel, and our ability to resist internal and internal threats is challenged as a result. And so that's why I'm keen to come to Australia to speak at CIS events and others about what is the West, why are we as prosperous and comfortable and as free as we are, and how do we preserve that?
Rita.
Well, how do we preserve that when there seems to be so much self-loathing in the West, particularly from younger people who've had this indoctrination really from a very young age, from the culture, from the education system? How do we protect something that so many within the community see as toxic and oppressive and a feature of white supremacy?
Well, the first thing we've got to do is what we're doing here, which is start talking about the opposite to that. I agree with you, Rita, completely. We have probably 2 or 3 generations now, including my own, who not only have never been taught anything positive about the West, really. But they've also been taught that the West is evil, colonial, slavery, blah, 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 in a way that is completely decontextualized, one-sided, is not accurate. One question that I'm always asking these young people is, like, we talk a lot about illegal immigration in all of our countries. Why is it that Australians aren't getting on small boats and trying to sail for safety or freedom or comfort or prosperity anywhere else? Let's talk about that. Let's actually find out why we are where we are. And I think that's the beginning of the conversation. I think the biggest thing that has happened, not only in my lifetime, but also prior to my lifetime, really, is the destruction of our history. And Orwell warned us about this: who controls the past controls the future. So the first thing we have got to do is start teaching our children. And that, frankly, look, the education system is always going to be captured to some extent by people who at this point hate our societies. We have got to start by teaching our own children the values of the West and the history of the West in a proper way. If we can do that, perhaps we can recapture elements of the education system. And I really do think it starts from there, because unless we are able to articulate how we got here, I just don't see the West enduring in the long term.
James.
Well, Konstantin, I'm glad you mentioned Orwell, because I was just thinking about, as you were speaking about, this Orwellian trope on the part of the elites, not just the young people, but the elites seem to be very much in favor of undermining and hollowing out all the things that they say they're in favor of. And one of the things we hear all the time is the phrase "our democracy," which is code word for, everybody has to vote the same way, otherwise there's some sort of threat. We see this with Trump, we see this with other candidates. Are the elites, or the leadership class, are they actually leading us to some sort of crisis? I know you talk about, recapturing parts of the education system, and maybe we can turn things around down the road, but it seems to me that the people in charge do not believe fundamentally in the democracy and in the liberal societies that they claim to, with their rhetoric, be defending.
I completely agree with you. And one of the most dangerous things that I have observed in the last 8 years or thereabouts is the fact that whenever the people actually express their opposition to something that is being done, instead of hearing that outcry, which we saw with Brexit, which I didn't vote for, by the way, or which we saw in America with Donald Trump and others around the world, the rising wave of populism isn't coming out of nowhere. This is something I keep trying to tell people, especially my friends on the left. You've got to pay attention when the people speak and when they rise up and say, we don't want this. We don't want to be going down this path. We don't want to be moving in this direction. And I agree with you completely. If the elites do not start listening to the people, they are the ones that are going to destroy our democracy, because on all sorts of issues, whether they're economics or domestic issues, or whether it's foreign policy, or whether it's cultural issues that I actually think are really, really important. People like us always get accused of, being culture warriors, which to me betrays this very funny thing that as if culture doesn't matter. Culture is the thing that matters most in a society. It is the difference between a successful society and a failed society. We know this. So the people who are destroying our culture will dismiss us as culture warriors. We're actually, what we should be saying is, culture really matters, and we should be talking about it and winning the argument on that as much as we can. But I agree with you. Listen, if the people in charge do not start listening to the public on all sorts of issues, I mean, I know that in Australia, for example, the issue that is so crucial to young people here in the UK is just as difficult as the housing crisis. And if you don't fix that, I keep saying to people, including my friends on the conservative side of things, if you don't fix this, and they're in charge, they've been in charge here in the UK for 14 years now, why would young people support democracy? If I can't vote my way out of the things that are not working in my life, why would I support the system? And I think one of the reasons, frankly, that there are sections of both left and right that are increasingly enamored with tyrannical and authoritarian foreign regimes like Putin's Russia is because they're losing faith in democracy. We're in a very dangerous place, and people in charge have to listen to the public.
Just, Konstantin, in your Oxford Union address, you attacked quite aggressively the cult of climate change and pointed out that all around the developing world, people are too busy trying to get on with life, to live, to survive. How much, your parents came from the Soviet Union, you were born there. How much do you see the links between kind of the cult of climate change and I guess that Orwellian Soviet totalitarian mindset? How dangerous is it for our kids to be so caught up in this cult of climate change?
Yeah, well, look, I'm a climate pragmatist, as I like to call myself. I think that we've got to be sensible about it. I don't think that, climate change isn't happening or anything like that. I just think that we've got to look at ways that we can manage it. And, I don't think it's all doom and gloom. I think actually we've got to ask, how disruptive will it be? Can we adapt? Will it potentially be beneficial in some ways? We see that, for example, the number of climate-related deaths of human beings are going down every year. So this doom and gloomerism is something that bothers me. And then there is a whole load of censorship and shutting down of discussion that happens around that just seems completely inappropriate to me for what is essentially a practical issue. We've got to deal with this challenge. We've also got to make sure that our pensioners, as they are in the UK, probably less of an issue in Australia with the climate you guys have, but our pensioners are freezing to death every winter here. Do we want to cause that because we're so obsessed with this suicide cult of net zero? We've got to be sensible about all of this stuff. And so, yeah, I agree with you. I think we've got to be aware that it's something that we've got to manage in a pragmatic way. We've got to listen to sense and deal with it in a common sense way, taking into account the costs and benefits of every policy. And this is no exception.
Oh, you'd be surprised. We've had the same issue here, obviously not as grim, but pensioners having health issues, some even dying because they're not turning on their heating. I just want to quickly ask about your own political journey. You probably started off on the left, as many of us did, and now you're considered conservative or right-leaning. People on the left would say you're far right. How do you feel about being characterised as far right by some?
Well, it's something, it's just the silliness of the current political system. I call myself politically non-binary, and, with good reason, because people on the right think I'm on the left, people on the left think I'm on the right. I just like to think for myself. I am worried about the extremes on the left. I'm also not averse to, calling out when the right goes wrong too. All day I'm having comments on Twitter today about something I said about a right-wing politician that people didn't like. I'm interested in the truth, guys, and I think we all should be interested in the truth. The truth is never going to be with one political party or the other. Political machines and political movements in general eventually involve you having to agree with things that you don't agree with for tribal reasons. I don't think that's the way to go. I think people in our position, we're in the media, we've got to be calling the shots. We're calling as they say in America, the balls and strikes as we see them. And that's what I'm always trying to do. So look, do I think the Western civilization is great? Yes. Do I think it's worth preserving? Yes. Do I agree with everything that people on the right say? No. Do I think the left has some points, particularly in relation to, do we sometimes let inequality become too much of a problem? I do think they have a good point on some of those things. So let's look, for me, it's why don't we get the best policies in place for the people of our countries? That's what I'm interested in.
James.
Finally, Konstantin, I want to ask you about this here, because I don't want to sound like a culture doomer in the same way that the climate people are doomers, but are you at all concerned when you see just sort of the rise of the electronic surveillance state pushed by AI, and the whole idea that, we had the hilarious thing this week with Google and their AI deciding that the founding fathers of America were a bunch of black women or something. But, on the serious note, though, we do seem to be entering an age where reality can be manipulated, and our connection to what actual reality is divorced from what people are going to be swimming in. Does this concern you, in terms of the culture and the ability for people on our side to influence it? And by people on our side, I just mean simply people who want objective truth and the ability to talk about objective truth.
I think we're in a very dangerous place, very, very dangerous. And I think the fact that we essentially no longer have a shared reality, and what we saw with this Google product now with AI, where, it's unbelievable. It is genuinely unbelievable, except, of course, it's entirely believable given that what we know about the big tech companies over the last decade or so. And it's no surprise to me, because it's interesting that, these companies always talk about diversity and representation, but one of the reasons it's happening is, a small number of people in San Francisco, which is not exactly a middle of the road representative city in the world, right? In terms of the politics and culture in San Francisco, they are essentially determining what truth is. And there've been some incredible things coming out where, it's like you ask this product, I'm proud of being black. And it says, oh, go, great. That's wonderful. I'm proud of being Asian. Great. I'm proud of this. I'm proud of that. I'm proud of being white. And it gives you a whole load of, reasons why you shouldn't be. Somebody tricked it. It was very funny because this thing obviously was refusing to show you anything good about white people. And then so somebody asked for pictures of Nazis, and that came up as diverse. They had some brown Nazis in it just to make sure everybody was represented. And that's when they went, oh, this is too far now. When this happens, when these companies are essentially trying to put a thumb on the scales of reality, put a thumb on the scales of what we believe, you're going to find this. And it's a very difficult challenge. I won't pretend that there's an easy way to fix it, because there is a debate in our society, really, about what the truth is. There always has been. And it just seems to me like one side has pulled the duvet a little bit too far over to one side. And so we've got to have those conversations. And one of the things I have to say, guys, I am so enthused by is, and by the way, Elon Musk is not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but the fact that he has opened the window for people who want to have a serious conversation about this stuff. There's one place in the social media ecosystem where the censorship is not what it was. It actually means that all the other platforms are no longer censoring as much, because there's no point, because we can all get their information on X.
Exactly.
And that's why I'm excited about, I hope he, digs up another $44 billion in the back of his sofa somewhere and starts an AI company or something like that.
I'm sure he will. Absolutely, I'm sure he will. Konstantin Kisin, can't wait to see you out here in Australia. Get on that plane, fly safely, and we'll see you out here. Tickets still available to see Konstantin. Go to cis.org.au or ipa.org.au, and hope we don't let you down when you're out here. Konstantin Kisin, thanks so much for coming on Outsiders today.